Be Honest with Dr. Yana. Join me for honest conversations with experts, get practical advice that will help you to better navigate your relationships and empower you to create meaningful and lasting connections. Fridays on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back live on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. And you are live with myself, Dr. Yana, on Be Honest with Dr. Yana. We are having conversations in the series of traumatic relationships and revealing some could be sensitive details about our personal lives. We have a guest with us today, Robert Mitchell, back again. Welcome, Robert.
Hey.
Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yes, Robert had a very nice life that most of us could probably be envious of. Had a perfect place to live in Southern California in LA. Some may doubt that LA is the best place on earth, but it's beautiful.
Pretty
Fantastic
nice.
Family, beautiful wife, very kind and supporting, fantastic children. And he himself was a good husband and a good citizen of our society until he had something very traumatic happen to him, which lasted for a few years. He got into a relationship with a woman that nearly destroyed his life. And we discussed it in some detail in our previous episode. But today, we are going to talk about how to prevent this kind of interference into our life, how to listen to ourselves, to our intuition. What signs do we have? Not necessarily paranormal signs, just general signs in our lives, things that we notice about our partner, about synchronicities that do take place in our lives, in our situations that we do not pay attention to. And today we will be discussing that exactly. So, Robert, you shared with me that there were so many different synchronicities and actual insights while you were in the relationship with that woman. But if we could scroll back to the very beginning of that affair, would you say that at that time you had somewhat of an intuition telling you that perhaps is not the route to take?
I did have intuitions. Being in certain circumstances with that person, being around them socially, being around their friends, being around their family, and having this deep-seated sense that it was wrong for me to be involved with this person. That it was a deviation from the quality of my life and a deviation from the morality of my life. Certainly I had signs about that, and it was almost as though there was like an intelligence that was trying to intervene on behalf of my better nature, on a number of occasions in that experience. And I just really didn't listen. I didn't listen to my dreams. I didn't listen to things that happened that were synchronicities. I just basically willfully ignored the signs of how just diabolical the situation was.
Well, at the beginning, when we are so excited about someone, when our hormones are flying out of the roof,
yeah,
we don't necessarily want to believe the voice of reason, do we?
No, the voice of reason. In fact, it was sort of part of the excitement was defying reason. Part of the excitement was defying my more knowing nature and the values that I'd been raised with and the love that I'd been given. That was part of the excitement of the whole thing.
And you followed that path.
I did. I followed that path. I didn't follow that path all the way. There was always a part of me that was reticent about making a commitment to the person that I was involved with, because I knew that I could never redeem myself once I fully embraced the mistakes that I made. And there was a part of myself that was always dragging my feet, that was moral and conscious and aware, and knew that it was wrong and knew that I was on the wrong path. And I can say that I recall a synchronicity that was so big that it made me aware that it was almost intolerable for whatever intelligence that has an investment in my life for me to continue down that path. And things like that were happening all the time.
Can you share that with us?
Sure. A couple of years into the relationship I had, the person I was involved with, they were always, they themselves were getting divorced or going through a divorce, and they were always haranguing me about getting divorced, which I never did. I never did give in to their wishes and get divorced. And one time I was home, and at that time the mode of communication that I used with them was Facebook. That was how we communicated with each other, and through Facebook messages. And I was home alone at nighttime, and I was communicating with them, and they were saying, "You need to get divorced. You really need to get divorced. You need to act on getting divorced." And all of us, while I was having that engagement, the lights went out on an entire side of the house. And in the house I was in, that had never happened, but the lights just like went out. And I knew that there was a fuse box in the backyard. So I went to the backyard to flip the fuses to reset them. And it did reset the fuses. And when I came back to my computer in the living room, my wife was standing in front of the computer reading the message that I'd been sent about that I needed to get divorced. And that was really the first that she had heard or known of what was going on.
Well, the message got through very unexpectedly.
Yeah. And from that point on, and I knew that was kind of an act of God. Like I knew that the synchronicity that happening, having never happened before in that home, having the electricity go out while I was reading that message, and thinking I was home alone and having to go serve the attention of the circuit breaker, and then coming back, and my wife had come home and she was standing in front of the computer reading the message that said, "You need to divorce your wife." I knew that there was some sort of objective intelligence that was involved in that experience.
Well, the thing is that your wife saw that message,
Mm-hmm.
and she did not really make a scene. What happened is that, that everybody would make a scene, uh, catching the husband cheating on them, essentially.
Yeah.
But that did not bring the end to your relationship with your wife, because she was still hoping that your relationship could be repaired even after that and continued.
Yeah. My wife is a profound person, and she understood the complexities of life. It wasn't her preference, it wasn't her ideal, but I think her priority was her family. Her priority were her kids and her family and our marriage. And I think she was had a lot of dignity during the whole experience, because she knew who the person was, she knew who the person's husband was, and she never openly confronted them or confronted their husband about what was going on. And she wanted me to work it out for myself. I think that she wanted me to work it out for myself, and hopefully was hoping that I would work it out, that these things happen in life and that I'd work it out for the good of everybody.
I can only imagine how difficult it was for your wife at the time to find out and also to keep her cool, keep herself together during the entire situation, because you didn't end that affair immediately. You still entertained the idea of this excitement of possibly, and not even possibly, you thought that that woman was the love of your life.
Yeah, I thought that I really thought that I was like there was some sort of evolution happening from where I was in my life to someplace that I was going. And it was very encouraged by this person. It was very encouraged by this person. But I just kept finding myself in these circumstances that were lesser and lesser and lesser than the life that I lived in. And it was just shown to me over and over and over again that I was choosing some degenerative state that was lesser than the life that I was already in. And I could never, ever ignore that. And, there were funny synchronicities along the way. There were so many of them, like the one I just mentioned, but like I can mention another one, which was I had this whole, I recorded 8,000 dreams, and I had this whole topography of this kind of primordial Los Angeles that preceded civilization that I would dream about. And I would draw the energy of it from and try and engage with it and relate to it in a kind of psychological way rather than in a kind of egoic day-to-day engagement, but try and draw on this primordial energy. And in the dreams, what I called the place was Sun Canyon. Like I said, it was like Los Angeles before it was Los Angeles. And I remember I took a trip with this person. It was after I'd left my family. And we ended up, a friend of hers owned a trailer park in the desert. And we ended up spending a night there in this, like, it was almost like it was like a meth, like there were meth labs there. It was such a degenerative, low end environment. We were staying in this really uncomfortable mobile home, which I guess that's how I describe it. And the people all around us were, they were kind of barely hanging on in civilization. And I remember like just thinking, this is such the wrong place for me to be. It's so wrong for me to be here in this environment with this person around these people. And when I drove out, I saw a sign that the village, the mobile home village, was called Sun Canyon. And I just knew that it was such a degenerated state of consciousness that I found myself in, being with this person in these circumstances, and that this is what they were offering me. They were offering me this lower quality existence that I just somehow embraced.
In the canyon, right, in a lower place somewhere in the trailer park with meth lab, that should tell you something, right? And
I was being told things the whole time.
And then you would wake up brushing it off, or you would just continue to put it in the pile of coincidences, waiting for the time for yourself to break, finally.
I had the sense of dread. I literally had the sense of dread that was almost like this authoritative sense of myself, almost that like my grandparents were observing me, or some profound parts of myself were observing me and were just so disapproving of what I was doing. Like, I don't know if it was probably my morality. It was probably the more quality aspects of my consciousness that I at times would have this sense of dread that was almost in the air, and observing me and disapproving of what I was doing. And I would constantly be making plans to end the relationship and constantly thinking, well, I have to be gone by this date, or I have to be gone by the time their parents are visiting, or I have to be gone by my birthday. And I just kept ignoring it. I just kept ignoring it. And then things started happening that made it no longer possible for me to ignore what was going on. And I would do things like I wouldn't be able to find my keys. And this is years into it. And I couldn't find my keys, and I'd have to go to a big meeting, and I'd say, if you just let me find my keys, I will leave.
Did you? Did you?
Yeah, and then I'd find my keys, and then like in the last half year of being with that person, I had 2 car accidents that were totally outside of my control. One of them was I was coming around a corner in a mountain road, and a car was coming right at me in my lane. It had crossed over in the lanes, which had happened a lot in those mountain passes, and I had to swerve out of the way towards the side of the road. And I literally could have gone off the side of the road, and there was like a 400 or 500 foot drop, and the front end of my car hit a rise in the road and broke my axle, and it kind of kept me from going over the side. And so then I got my car repaired. I had to get a new axle, and like knowing that this is escalating, like my need to be out of this situation is escalating, and there's, you know, I think accidents are like synchronicities. And then I was getting this person a Christmas present.
But did you, before we get to Christmas present, did you actually, did that accident or 2 accidents happen after you gave a promise that you were going to leave that
Yeah,
person
they
if you
did
find
happen.
the keys?
They did happen after I promised I would leave.
The amazing thing about it is that when we give a promise, it's like the contract that we sign
Yeah.
somewhere, and we have to fulfill that promise. We have to keep our word. Otherwise, those negative things are bound to happen.
Mm.
And of course, that it did. And there's nothing spooky about it. It's just from the ethical standpoint, even if we don't give a promise to God per se, right? Because we all have our different understanding of God. Consider that you gave that promise to yourself,
You know,
that I am going to leave.
I was giving that promise to some intelligence that I felt was invested in my life and knew what I was up to. You know, whatever I'd call that. You know, I think synchronicities are always a revelation of 2 things that seem unrelated, but they are related by meaning. You know, I think that's what Jung said. And I also think, you know, my favorite quote about synchronicities from Jung is that for those who have eyes that see, synchronicities are occurring all the time. And I think
But we don't. But we don't.
we
What
don't
we
often have
do,
eyes to see, and then we don't actually act on what we see, you know, and what we're being shown. You know,
well,
I
in
think,
our Western society, this is what we think. Those are the prejudices, and people in the modern Western society, we should not be believing those prejudices. But somehow, there's so many different religions, and we go to church, and we also attend other religious gatherings. Right? We go to
right,
mosques. We go to even to Eastern philosophical places, uh, thinking that that is something that we should be doing, right? But that is a spiritual, commonly accepted place to go, right? And we think that if we go to synagogue, for example, out of all of those places, that we are going to meet God there, right? And the interesting thing about it is that God is inside of us, and we can
yeah.
call it our higher self, and we can give a promise to ourselves. But nevertheless, if we do not keep that promise, all those negative things are bound to happen.
You know, I think that it's really important for everybody in their understanding of their religious life to be able to differentiate between the exoteric and the esoteric. And the exoteric is we go to synagogue, we go to church, we go, you know, wherever we go to worship. And there is somebody there who's an intermediary between us and God, whether it's an imam or a priest or a rabbi or a Buddhist, you know, or any kind of clergy. And there's a sense that they have some relationship with God that they're sharing with you. And also there's a social aspect of that, which is if I traded you a goat for a cow, we can go on Saturday and Sunday or Sunday and feel like in front of that person
Right.
we've had an even exchange, right? But
Yes.
esoteric, there is no intermediary. There is just between you and the intelligence that sort of gives life, and its creativity is part of your life, and it's your life is a byproduct of its creativity, and it's interested in what you do, you know, and it's interested in how you transform, because that's really the point of your life, is it's curious about how you presented with these challenges are going to overcome them, you know. And I think it has an opinion, you know. I think it has a very clear opinion about right and wrong. And you know, I get a lot of questions in the work I do about like what's the meaning of life? Like, how can there be a God if all these people are suffering? You know, how can there be a God if these, you know, these natural disasters, or there's inequality? And I think that we're kind of in an open field of creativity where we kind of demonstrate what we understand, you know. And I don't think that there's any investment in, you know, I think in right or wrong. You know, I think that there is right and wrong, but we have free choice, you know, to demonstrate what we
Well,
understand.
if we have that free choice,
Yeah.
and if we know that possibly God is sending all of those coincidences as signs, God is talking to you through different kind of people, through different circumstances, don't you think that even if we leave religion out of the question, don't you think that all of those synchronicities, they have uh, such a great meaning if you look for it, and if you connect all those dots, you are able to avoid all the situations and not even to get into that in the first place.
Yeah, I think synchronicities are intended to show you where you are and where you are in your path and what's happening. You know, and if you don't heed them, they'll reoccur like a dream reoccurs. You know, like sometimes people get in touch with me and they want to work on a dream that they've had for years and years and years and years. And to me, that says they're not listening. You know, they're not listening to the point of the dream. So it says you're not listening. Here it is again. Here it is again. And I think synchronicities, they show you where you are in space and time in your development and in your evolution, and you have to heed them and you have to make sense of them and see what they're saying to you.
That is such a great observation.
Yeah.
It's not like there is some older man sitting up there in the sky, in the
Mm-mm.
heavens, in fact, controlling our every action and just like pointing finger, don't do that, or this
Right.
the bad things is going to happen, or don't do that. The thing is that are we have to listen to those signs, and each step we take can in fact be significant in understanding what is the situation for me, what does it hold for us? For long time ago, I heard this profound statement, and it made such a huge impact on me. I was 17, and I heard that any relationship that you come across, if that relationship is very turbulent, is abusive, does not feel right, and you don't have peace in your heart about it, then it is not your relationship. If it is not true to you, then it is not for you.
Yeah.
So I remember for various relationships that I was in, and of course, not all of them were peaceful. A lot of them were turbulent. And I would know that that is not for me. Somehow I heard that truth and I kept it in my heart for all these years. I knew that if it's not true to me, if it doesn't work out, if it doesn't, if there's so many different impediments and circumstances that are telling you that you should not be with that person, you should not go this way, then it is something to listen to.
Oh,
And
yeah. You know, in my experience in this particular circumstance, things just kept getting worse and worse. You know, and the amplitude of the feeling became worse and worse. And you know I told you about the synchronicity that ended the relationship, and I think it's worth telling your
oh,
audience.
yes,
Yeah.
it's a
Well,
fantastic coincidence.
yeah.
Also,
I
also
had
tragic.
I had another accident. I had another car accident where I was driving. I actually picked up a gift for this person. I was driving on the highway, and a dog ran out on the highway from a camping site, and the car in front of me slammed on its brakes, and I ended up rear-ending the car, not very badly, um, I didn't cause that much damage. But it was again another accident. It was a few months after the accident before. And then what was happening, and I was like, oh, okay, this is going to keep happening. And then what happened, the final straw in the relationship was my mother was dying. My mother had late stage dementia, and I'd been dealing with it for years and traveling back and forth between New York and Los Angeles. And my mom was in hospice, and she really gotten to the point where I'd seen like 35, 36 years earlier when my father was dying, where there's a laxity in their physicality right before death. And it's like your brain is no longer controlling your body. And when I saw my mom like that, it was like childbirth. It's like women don't remember the pain of childbirth. And I was like, oh, yeah, I remember how that looks, but I hadn't thought about it since my dad died, since I saw my dad in that state. And the person I was in relationship with wanted to take one of their children to look at a college. And they called me and said, you have to come back. I can't get anybody to look after my pets. And so you need to come back and pet sit for me while I'm away. And I was like,
And then mind you that you were in New York at the time, and she
yeah, I was in
wanted
New
you to
York.
come
They were
back
in
to
Los
LA.
Angeles. They were in New York, and I was in Los Angeles. And I knew my mom was going to die because I saw the laxity in her face, and she was no longer there. Anyway, so I said to the person, I said, my mom's dying. And their response was, yeah, your mom's been dying for 6 months. You owe this to me. And I need to take this trip. And I was like, okay, I guess whatever, like maybe she'll hang in there a little longer. I felt like I'd really said my goodbyes, and I felt like I had no choice with this person. But the day before, I went out to JFK, and when I got to JFK, the winds were blowing about 70 miles an hour. And the canopies on the entranceway sounded like rifle shots because they were flapping so fast. And I walked on the plane, and when I stood on the plane was swaying 4 feet one way and 4 feet the other.
That's incredible.
And I was like looking around at like people sort of tolerating the plane sitting there and swaying like that. And I was like, I am not taking off on this plane. And I said to the stewardess, I said, I'm getting off this plane. And they said, you are? And I said, I am. And I'm surprised I'm the only person who's getting off this plane. But I had a place in New York, and I didn't think I was going to die or anything. I just thought it was going to be the most unpleasant takeoff in the history of my life. And I felt like I didn't need to do it. So I went back to New York for the day, and a friend of mine who was my best friend from Los Angeles appeared in Central Park. And I ended up spending the day with my best friend from Los Angeles. And the next day, and the person who was waiting for me was very annoyed that I'd stayed there and thought that I'd stayed there to be with this person. But I didn't find out that they were here until after I went back to New York. So it was this delightful synchronicity. I spent time with them and their son on a beautiful spring day. Next day, I go back to Los Angeles. And as soon as I get there, I have this really big fight with the person I was in the relationship with. I don't recall the circumstances, but I remember they said some mean things to me. And I didn't sleep in their bed that night. Where I slept in one of their children's beds downstairs, who had been very problematic in our relationship, who'd gotten into quite a bit of trouble, who was created a lot of difficulty in the relationship, and was part of the reason why I couldn't stay in the relationship, because I knew that this was a byproduct of, Jung said, children don't have troubles, they have their parents' troubles. And I had my own children who were really well behaved and really they were just well raised and well behaved, and they didn't get into trouble. And that was part of the immorality of the situation. I was in a situation where people were in trouble, were getting in trouble. Anyway, so I decided that night I was going to sleep downstairs, and I ended up in the bed of one of these children because they weren't there, in this cold room, really cold room, like because the person didn't have the heat on because it was, I guess, too expensive to heat the place, and in a bed that was too small for me, and it wasn't my bed. And in the middle of the night,
Well,
at
can you hear yourself, Robert? The bed was too small.
yeah,
The
I
room
know it
was
was
too
terrible.
cold. It
It was
was
terrible. The room
too
was
small
cold,
for
the bed was
you.
too small. It was the mattress wasn't comfortable. And then at 4 a.m. the phone rang. And I knew that if my phone was ringing at 4 o'clock in the morning, there was only one reason that it was ringing. And what had happened is my mom had died during the night while I was sleeping in that bed, in that cold room, in that small bed, away from this person. And I would like it wasn't 3D or 5D or 6D. It was like 10D. Like, this is so wrong. It is so wrong that you found out about these circumstances of your mother's death the way you found out, in this bed, in this place, in this discomfort, far away. Now, I didn't feel like I would have been there when my mom died. I didn't feel like that at all, because a few months before she died, she said to me, she said, I think it'd be easier for me to die for you if I wasn't there, if you weren't there. So I think my mom kind of chose that. Like, she didn't want me around while she was dying. And when I said goodbye to her, I knew it was the last time I was going to see her. And I turned off the PA in the hospital and I played George Harrison's All Things Must Pass for her. And I kissed her goodbye and said goodbye. And I knew that was our last moment together. And I never was at her hospice during the night. So I know that even if I was in New York, I wouldn't have been there. But I felt, finding out how I found out in the circumstances that I did, in the way that I did, was like, okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Like, are you listening to this? Could this be any worse? Are you being embraced by someone who loves you at this moment, in a situation where you're getting care and concern and empathy? And it's funny because I went out of the room in the morning and the person had known what had happened, and I was kind of standing there naked and they were kind of naked, and they patted me like they were sorry. And I was just like, because they knew how bad it was. They knew how bad the circumstances, that they'd made me rush back to do them a favor. And I'd ended up sleeping in a child's bed. And they knew how like there was no way forward from this. That
And
there was,
that was the compassion that she showed you. Pat on
yeah,
the back.
she patted me with her hand, like, because I think she felt embarrassed. I think she felt embarrassed that the circumstances were so bad that I ended up finding that out.
I don't know about that, because people who show compassion, especially in this situation, well, first of all, if your mom died, that would be could also be a different response in consoling you. Moreover, to be the cause of you being absent and to console you that way by patting you in the back.
One of the things I realized afterwards is that, when people are very narcissistic, they really have problems with, like, death and illness and helping other people and other people's needs. And that was really what I saw. I saw that, if I hadn't seen it enough, the person was very intent on attending my mother's funeral. And she made a big, like, bouquet, like my mother had won the Kentucky Derby. And she showed up 20 minutes into the funeral with the bouquet, so that my mother had already been eulogized, and everyone turned and looked at this person walking up with this huge bouquet. And and they'd missed the first 20 minutes of the funeral. And then at a certain once the funeral was over, we put the bouquet was placed on my mother's casket, and there were like 3 pictures on the person's Facebook of my mother's casket with the bouquet on it. So I had to say, please take that down, because I thought it was in such bad taste, so.
If anything can go wrong, this is the epitome of wrong. You were, in fact, it's the situation showed so much. It was so symbolic of your personal life, and even the small bed, cold room, and place that you weren't supposed to be.
Yeah,
And that is reminiscent of your relationship itself, that it was too small for you. It is something that you were not
it was too
supposed to
small,
be
too
in.
cold, and and too unempathetic. And I'd known that for a while. I'd known that for a while. And,
But
you know,
synchronicity, that synchronicity, what you're talking about, there is a great aspect about that. It's not only your mom passing, it was a tragic event in the first place, and it was double tragic that you were there, a way that you were in LA, watching the dogs, something that you weren't even supposed to be doing, or even saying yes to the person who asks you to do that. There was a different meaning to your mom passing and you ending that relationship. What was that?
um, I think ultimately there was a relationship between the the less evolved and the more damaged parts of my mother and me being in this relationship at all. And I think that in the end, I was being shown that they were so closely related, that it was such a relief. My mother suffered so much in her lifetime with her own suffering. And when she died, I felt an enormous relief for her because she was no longer suffering. I mean, she had dementia and she was suffering physically, but she'd had a suffering her whole life that was an enormous amount to deal with. And I felt so relieved for her that she no longer had to do that when she died. And then I felt like the relationship I was in was sort of the foundation of it was my comfort with suffering. It was
Was it
familiar.
essentially reliving your relationship that you had with your mom, except it was with a romantic partner?
Exactly. My kid's mom was kind of in a lot of ways too healthy to do that. She came from a really loving family, like a multi-generational family that was around her all the time and loving and responsible, and cousins and uncles and aunts and family dinners. And to me, that felt so unfamiliar. It felt so, my parents had been in Los Angeles far away from their families because that's what they wanted. So it was just us. And my children they were so warmed by that, by the extended family and the love and the stability. And it was a great decision on my part to have children with somebody like that. But then in the relationship I had during the marriage, and then after it was over, I kind of went back to the same sort of person with the same sort of troubles that my mother had, and tried to work it out through caring for them, through compromising huge aspects of my own life, and through basically releasing my relationship with my family, to show my allegiance to them, and it really was
Nice.
the most troubled thing I did in my entire life. And I know it's something that I will do. I'll kind of wrestle with between now and my death, that my decision making was so bad.
Well, for example, with your wife coming from such a stable background and a loving family and good relationships with everyone, with family members, and have a stable psyche and a mental state,
Yeah.
for people like that, it would be kind of difficult to understand why a husband would want to leave and go to absolutely destructive relationship. And there are so many people there, men and women, who in fact can't understand what is the reason behind it. We gave them everything, right? We were the most stable. We bore great children to them, but nevertheless, the partner goes to a very destructive relationship.
Yeah,
And but what's important to understand here that it is not about them.
absolutely
Like
not.
you're saying, it has to do a lot with a broken psyche of the person who
Exactly.
gets into the destructive relationship,
Yeah.
about the past. And in fact, when you when your dad died, when you were still a child, you were 10,
I was
right?
16. I
Oh,
was 16.
you were 16.
I
Yes,
was 16. Yeah.
you were left alone with your mom.
Yeah.
And
Well, I didn't know that.
if your dad was a buffer essentially between you and your
Yeah, he
mom,
was. He
there
was.
was no buffer anymore,
Yeah, it
and
was
you
just,
were left alone with a destructive personality of your mom,
yeah,
of a very unstable emotional states, explosive, and very similar to the woman that you were dating. And like you said, that your mom probably and very possibly had a borderline personality disorder that could be. But uh, you were so used to that environment. You were
yeah,
so used to saving your mom all the time.
all the time. You know, it's funny because I had an analyst once say, you know, a lot of people in your circumstances, when you're 18, you would have just said goodbye. You know, I'm not having anything else to do with
Yes.
you. And he was sort of curious about why I didn't. And I felt like this moral obligation because my father was gone. And I felt like nobody had any real investment in my mother. And so I felt kind of morally obligated to stay involved in her life, you know, and, you know, sometimes I think that was a mistake. And then sometimes I just think that that's the situation that I found myself in, and I dealt with it as well as I could. And I think in my marriage and in my family, I really kind of showed that I wasn't completely destroyed by that experience. And then in getting involved with that person, I demonstrated that there was still a lot of damage there that needed to be addressed. And if I think that if any good comes of this circumstance, and you know, if there's anything for the audience to learn from this, like I don't feel like the person destroyed my life. I feel like I'm still healthy and strong and creative,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a lot of life to live. But I also feel like I found out things about myself that I kind of, they were kind of in the hinterlands of my awareness, you know, that I would take such delight in being destructive, you know, that it was almost like a high taking a wrecking ball to my life, you know. And I think in a way, the most diabolical parts of my mother would have liked that. You know, she would have liked that. She would, because those things had taken root in her life. And me navigating life successfully with a loving partner and a family, somehow she was envious of that, you know, and that she would have really, she kind of enjoyed that I wrecked it, you
Well,
know.
there
And
was a situation when you were trying to leave, and your mom essentially wanted to prevent you from leaving by doing an egregious act. Could you share with us?
oh yeah, well, soon after my dad died, and you know, the person I was in a relationship did the same thing. Soon after my dad died, I came home one day, and my mom was like an everyday marijuana smoker. You know, she was kind of bohemian and a hippie, but she was also self-medicating. And I came home one day, maybe a couple months after my dad had died. I could just feel that there was something going on with her. I didn't really get a sense of that, like the impact of her using marijuana every day until I was older, because it was just what I was used to. I didn't know why she was the way she was. But anyway, I came home one day and it was apparent to me that whatever she was, whatever state she was in, it was far beyond her usual state. And she was kind of picking on me, and it was dusk. And I said, just leave me alone. I don't want to be around you. And she picked up a piece of iron pyrite from the top of the stairs from a second story landing, and she threw it at me. And it was like a 10-pound piece of iron pyrite. But in the darkness, I didn't see what she did, but it went through my hair. Like I felt it go through my hair. And then I watched it split the wood on the floor next to me. And if it had hit me in the face, it, you know, it would have, it might have killed me. It might have broken my nose. It definitely would have split my skin. Anyway, so she came down, and I was like, I'm leaving. You're bananas, you know. And she was trying to make it up to me and trying to be affectionate with me. And I'm like, I'm leaving. I got to go. I got to get away from you. I can't be around you. And I went in my car. And when I got into the car, she dove onto the hood, and I was sort of reversing out of the driveway, and she was screaming for the neighbors while she was ripping off the windshield wipers. She was screaming for the neighbors to call the police because I had gone crazy. You know, I had gone crazy. And I literally, you know, thought, wow, I could go 50 miles an hour and slam on the brakes and get rid of her forever. Like it was that upsetting, or I could just pull over and walk away. And I pulled over and walked away. And, you know, it just showed me that she was willing to do anything. Like there was no bottom to her behavior. And, her calling for the police while I was trying to escape, it was something that was mirrored by the person that I was in the relationship with, who
What
like,
happened there?
well, when I left, they were really upset that I left and that I wasn't coming back. And they tried to get money from me. And, they said awful things to me. And I said some awful things to them as well. And when I went back to Los Angeles, because I had some work on, I had a outstanding bill at the tennis club that we played at that was in fact theirs, because I'd always paid for the tennis and I'd given them money for whatever was left when I left. And I kept getting these bills for like $1,200. And I told the guy, I was like, I already told you I'm gone. I'm not there anymore. You keep sending me this bill. And I went by the tennis club at like noon on a day when I knew that person always played either in the morning or the evening, to see the guy, and he wasn't there. And I just left a note and said, please call me. I want to talk to you about this. And when I got back to New York, she tried to take out a restraining order on me, like a 5-year restraining order on me that would have appeared online, that would have appeared for people looking to work with me professionally, that would have appeared for publishers or for people looking to have relationships with me. And, I'd been in a relationship with that person for 12 years and not had a moment where they'd felt afraid of me. And one of the things they asked on the restraining order was that their dogs were protected from me, which was so ironic because they'd asked me to fly 3,000 miles to look after their dogs, when they had to leave town. I mean, whatever they could do, their dogs loved me. Whatever they could do to create problems for me, they tried to do. And when we got to court, they so lost their composure because they also had fictionalized things in the report, like that I'd gone by their house at night. And I had records that I never did because I had Tesla records. And she basically did the same thing that my mom did when I tried to leave. She tried to create the situation where I was in trouble with the law. And one of the things I said when I was in court was that I've never been in court before, and they so lost their composure during the hearing, and they were so disheveled that I was going to see the evidence that they'd presented, that they just let it go. I mean, the person said, the judge saw what was going on, and he said, just stay away from each other. Just stay away from each other for a year. There's nothing on record. There's nothing online. There's not going to be anything. And, it was amazing to me that somebody wanted to cause me that much harm, and that somebody would fabricate a case against me to cause that much harm against me. But it was ultimately the same kind of diabolical thing that my mom had done. It was the same kind of diabolical thing when my mom had done when she tried to. And, it was astounding to me. It was astounding.
Well, like you said, it's a cautionary tale for
It is a
many
cautionary
people
tale. Yeah.
not to have it happen. And because of the situation with your mom and also the woman that you dated, that you were in the relationship for how long?
It was almost 12 years.
Almost 12 years. And that is a long, long time.
Yeah.
And that when you were trying to leave this abusive relationships, what happens here is that this perceived abandonment, and of course the actual abandonment, when they see you actually leave or threaten them to leave, they immediately go into this frenzy state, and they can, of course, they can ruin your life completely. But what happens at the time, it's just like this diabolical situation, like you say, I hate you, don't leave me. In
Oh,
that situation,
she
it's
told me she
back
would
and forth.
decimate me. She told me she would decimate me. I have an email where she said, I will decimate you.
And
You
she
know,
tried to do that and she almost succeeded.
yeah.
But what's great about it is that, and I admire you for that, for not blaming, in fact, neither your mama or even the woman that you dated, but you took the whole responsibility for
The
it.
whole thing was my fault, and it's my fault. The whole thing. I apologized to my kid's mom about it. And I think my kid's mom had just the way she understood it was that I'd just gone crazy. And my kid's mom, who was a great judge of character, who knew who this person was, at a certain point, she said to me, "Be with whoever you like. Don't be with this person." And she was
Because
wise.
she was still your friend.
She's still my friend. She's still my
Yes.
friend. She's still my friend. She'll be my friend till the day I die. And she stayed my friend. She stayed my friend through it all. And the person in the relationship was always in my ear about what she was doing that was doing wrong. Because she herself had this high conflict divorce that was always high conflict, even for years after the divorce. And she was like, "You're what? She's doing this. She's doing that. She's doing this," and it would influence the way that I interacted with my kid's mom in ways that I feel kind of ashamed of, because I knew that my kid's mom was a great person and was a moral person and was a loving person and was one of the best people that I'd ever met. And it was like, I had a dream. I don't know if I mentioned this in the other podcast, but I had a dream while there was a lot going on and I was still living in my family home. And in the dream, I came upon a fire and there was a witch chanting spells into the fire. And I knew that I was very susceptible to these spells and that I needed to get away, because if I heard them, I would be influenced by them. And in the dream, I didn't know if that was about my kid's mom or about the person I was in the relationship with. It was hard for me to tell, like understand it. But I know now that it was about the person that I was in the relationship with,
Well,
and
it's probably hard to call your wife a witch because she was a kind person and trying to support you.
yeah, but I also have an inner witch because my mom was kind of a witch. So I have susceptibility to it. I'll tell you another synchronicity about this circumstance that's not dissimilar to that is the first night that I moved out and I was living in someone's guest house. I rarely have dreamed of my father in the years since he died. But the night I moved out, I dreamt that my father came and stood above my bed while I was sleeping. And he just said, "What are you doing?" And when I had the dream, I wasn't sure whether he was saying, "What are you doing?" because I was roughly the same age as him. And I felt like I was making a move to live the rest of my life happily and not die like he died. Or he was saying, "What are you doing? You haven't been raised to do this. You haven't been raised to leave your family. You haven't been raised to leave this marriage with this good person." And it was another thing where I wasn't sure what it was about, but I now know that it was, "What are you doing? You've been raised with love and you've been raised with support and you've been raised with grandparents who are quality people who loved you. What are you doing behaving this way?" And I just think that I never really got away from the knowledge of the disapproval of the loving masculine attention that I had been bestowed on me in this lifetime, that I was rejecting to be with this kind of negative feminine figure, who didn't really ultimately
Yes.
care or love for me.
Well, we might say, of course, as I said, that I have a great respect for you for taking responsibility, but it is so difficult to even distinguish and actually understand why we have this pattern of relationships. Why do we choose? And unlike you, some other people, they are always choosing these destructive relationships because nobody talks about the pattern of good relationships, right? Because otherwise you would have stayed with the person. It's
Right.
always the pattern of destructive relationships. And most of the time, people blame the partner. instead of pointing the finger right back at themselves and asking themselves a question: why am I getting in this type of relationships?
Yeah.
This is my pattern. It's not that all those people are bad people, it's just not only that I'm attracted to those people, I am in fact getting into relationship with them. So people rarely take responsibility for it. It was important to understand is to actually look into yourself and ask yourself that question: why?
You know, one of the things I thought about is I really thought that I thought with the choices that this person had made and how they'd lived their life, and I think I ultimately felt like I was like there was something about them that was lesser quality than the person that I was married to, and it gave me more power. You know,
Mm.
they were less stable. You know, they were less able to regulate their own emotional system. They were more, they needed more help.
And
You
you
know,
were the savior.
yeah, I was the savior. I thought I was going to be the savior, and there were times where things I did for them were incredibly healing and loving to them. But at a certain point, I realized I could never do it. You know, like I was never going to be able to fix what was broken in the person. And when they realized that, that's when they got really mad, you know, because they shared the fantasy, I think, that with my psychological background and my caring for other people and having raised a family and having
Hmm.
super stable, successful kids, that I was going to bestow that upon their life. And when I couldn't undo everything that had come before me that had a certain momentum, that's when I knew that, you know, it's always, you know, I talk when I work with people like who are clients of mine in the work that I do and the healing work I do, that you have to be able to self-arrest. Meaning, if you're sliding down the mountain, you need to be able to stick the pole in the snow and stop your own slide. Because if you can't, you're going to pull people off the mountain with you. And I think that was, I got involved in a situation with someone who wasn't able to self-arrest. And I thought I'd do it for them. And then I thought they'd love me forever, you know, and be grateful to me forever. And at the same time that my mom died and this relationship ended, I realized nobody's ever going to be grateful to me for that. You know,
Nobody,
people will be
ever.
grateful to me for being loving and being consistent and being supportive and being a good friend and being reliable. But no, I don't have to be a redeemer. I don't have to redeem anybody, and I don't have to redeem myself by sacrificing good things that I'd been given for somebody who didn't have those things. You know, I think that's ultimately what I learned is I'd grown up in a loving environment, even though my mom was very troubled. My father had loved me a lot, and my grandfather had loved me a lot, and a lot had been provided for me that I was willing to say, here, I'm going to give all this up to take care of you. You know, will you love me for that? And you know, it's somebody who, you know, it was a tremendous mistake to make
And
that.
not that you lack that love in your life because your wife loved you. However, what
Still
happened,
loves me. She still loves
yes,
me. Yeah.
but the thing is that what you were trying to achieve in the relationship with that woman is that you were trying to prove that you're good enough to love and you can do, and that's why you wanted to do so much to save that person,
Yeah.
to be loved back. Like you
Yeah.
always wanted to be loved by your mom who could not provide that
Yeah.
love. And while you took responsibility for that, it is also too profoundly important to understand that that childhood experience was not your choice. We don't choose our parents. We choose the response. We owe it to ourselves the understanding, looking inside and understanding the patterns of behavior that we have. But that was not our choice.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it's not random, the parents that we have, and they provide a lesson for us. And, you know, I think Jung said, I am not what happened to me, I am what I become. And so it's what you become with the circumstances that you've been through, and what you transform it into that is really the determining factor of the quality of each of our lives.
Well, those are profound realizations, and I think that many of our listeners and viewers will be able to use that wisdom and apply it into their lives, because we cannot save everybody, and not everybody wants to be saved in the
Yeah.
first place. I know many people, and even from my own personal experience, there was a person of a very high social standing. He actually was already at that time retired in his 50s. He was a retired colonel
Wow.
of the US Army.
Mm.
But what happened is that he blamed me for being too independent, that I did not need to be rescued, because, as he told me, that you're everything that I've ever wanted. But if you just needed me to save you, if you just showed me that you need me to do all those things for you, of course, any woman wants the man to, of course, to care for her, to do things for her. But I did not show the need to be rescued. I wasn't broken. I did not need to be rescued. But he already had the syndrome of a rescuer, coming
Right.
from his parents, coming from the wife that died, and all of the relationship that happened after that. And I could see that subsequently he chose a woman that was in a position to be rescued, who also played a role of a victim, and she knew what she was doing.
Right.
So it's essentially people who want to be rescued, and the rescuers are attracting each other, and of course, based on their previous experiences and also the childhood experiences. So, thank you for sharing your incredible wisdoms. I do appreciate it.
Oh, it's my
Not ev- Yes, not every time that you come across this incredible wisdoms and incredible advice to people, because this is the way that I also approach life. You have to be able to cut it out of your life. You have to find the strength. And those that don't want to be rescued, I don't go to rescue. So
right.
thank you very much for showing up here and talking to us and sharing your wisdoms with our audience. And we hope to talk again.
All
But
right.
meanwhile, we were live on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM, live with Be Honest with Dr. Yana. And today, Robert Mitchell was very honest with me. So thank you so much. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Goodbye.
Goodbye.